So Mr. Elmer has handed out 3 exhibits for identification. One is the first CLF 22 is entitled Impact of Adding 485 Invenergy Megawatts in FCA 11. CLF 23 is Impact of Adding 970 Invenergy Megawatts in FCA 11. CLF 24 is Static Delist Cleared and FCA Clearing Price.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Mr. Stix. You indicated to me earlier that you wanted to make 3 corrections to your testimony before you adopt it. The first on page 37, lines 1 to 2. And please turn on your microphone when you're speaking, sir.
Is it on now?
Yes.
Okay. It's actually lines 2 and 3, and I removed the material after the term 600 MW for the period at the end, near the end of line 3.
So just to be clear, you're going to make the change on the PUC's copy and initial it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Elmer, I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't either. Does that mean that the sentence will now end after 600 MW?
Correct.
Mr. Stix, could you please read the sentence beginning on line 1 as it should appear after your correction is made?
For my analysis, I assumed new entry of only 600 MW, period.
Thank you. On pages 31 to 33, you discuss the SELP report. And on page 32, line 8, the figure 611 megawatts appears. Do you have a correction?
Okay, I'm sorry. Can I ask what page?
Yes. Page 32, line 8, the figure 611 megawatts appears. Do you have a correction there?
Yes.
And what is the correction?
And the correction is, and it starts after the word this. So the first figure is now 29,601, and the 611 figure is now 581.
What's that first figure? I'm sorry, that first figure?
First figure is 29,601, and the second figure is 581.
Thank you. In your testimony, you refer to ICR and to cone. Mr. Parker suggested a correction that you should refer to net ICR and net cone. The figures that you used in your pre-file testimony, were they in fact net ICR and net cone?
They were in fact net ICR and net cone in
And
all
yet-
cases.
And yet you refer to them as ICR and cone.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
As I was drafting the testimony, Mr. Elmer suggested that I simplify. And so I took his suggestion.
But the figures that you used are in fact net cone and net ICR.
Correct. And in fact, ISO New England in its press release on FCA 10 used the term ICR rather than net ICR on February 11th.
Mr. Stix, did you see the criticism that Mr. Parker and Mr. Hardy made of your analysis of FCA 11? I'm referring to Mr. Parker's testimony starting on page 59, line 10, and Mr. Hardy's testimony beginning on page 10, line 18. Yes. Are you familiar with that criticism?
I am.
In light of that criticism, do you continue to believe that your analysis of FCA 11 was reasonable and sound?
I do.
Have you prepared exhibits to help explain how you performed your analysis of FCA 11?
I have.
And you have two separate exhibits.
I do.
Why two?
One explains, starts from the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Hardy, and the other from the testimony of Mr. Parker.
And which is the one that refers to Mr. Hardy's testimony?
Number 22, which is titled Impact of Adding 485 Invenergy Megawatts in FCA 11.
Could you please walk us through this new exhibit as an aid to explaining what you did in performing your calculation pertaining to FCA 11?
Before he does that, can I just interpose an objection with regard to the CLF 22? Witnesses just testified that he did this in response to a pre-filed testimony of Mr. Hardy, that we certainly was capable of preparing that and putting that in his testimony that he filed, pre-filed. I don't think it's appropriate that he be preparing additional exhibits to submit, which are in fact rebuttal to Mr. Hardy, which he's already had more than enough opportunity to do in his pre-filed written testimony.
Well, I think the indication was that this exhibit and what he's being questioned on now is in response to Mr. Hardy's rebuttal testimony. Is that correct, Mr. Elmer?
Yes, it is correct. We've had no opportunity to pre-file testimony in response either to Mr. Hardy's rebuttal or to Mr. Parker's testimony, but we were assured by PUC counsel that we could address that on redirect at this hearing.
I understand that, and obviously, I think you were referring to, you asked him to refer to page 10 of the rebuttal testimony. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So on that basis, you may continue, and I'll overrule the objection.
Mr. Stix, can you explain to us, using this exhibit as an aid, what you did in performing your calculation for FCA 11 and why, sitting here today, you believe that that was reasonable and sound?
I would be happy to. The first point, the first estimated net ICR here is there along with net cone to show where the demand curve would be anchored when we start with FCA 10 capacity, that's the capacity that cleared in FCA 10, which is about 800 megawatts higher than, more than 800 megawatts higher than cleared in FCA 9. We add the new capacity that I'm estimating at 600 megawatts. We take out the retirement and permanent delist bids, which are known and were in my testimony, 27 megawatts, and the average static delist bid. These collectively are less than half of the retirements in the average previous auctions. And then we remove Invenergy, which brings us to 35,319 megawatts. Based on my estimate of the demand curve, that would clear at $6.64. We then add 485 megawatts for Invenergy, which brings us to 35,804 megawatts, which would clear at $4.53, except that there is a dynamic delist price at $5.50, and it's generally known in the industry that there will be significant delists at the $5.50 price. And so you estimate, you then remove what you need to get back to $5.50. And that's how I get to $5.50. And the purpose of this testimony was to clarify how you get back to $5.50. Because there were questions in the rebuttal testimony about how we get back there.
And,
Mr. Elmer, can I just interrupt you for 1 second, just for a clarifying question? Just for the record, could you just define static delist and dynamic delist?
I would be happy to. So the static delist process is a process that happens where where generators place bids before the auction to be delisted at prices above $5.50. They have to justify those to the internal market monitor. And on average over the last 5 years, they've averaged about 336 megawatts with a range of between 100 and 150 megawatts on either side of them.
So does that mean that if the price goes below that, they will no longer be considered?
Correct. And then once the price hits the dynamic delist price, a generator can choose to delist without any advanced planning and without having to justify why they're delisting.
And at the dynamic delist price, is there any review of the delisted entity by the internal market monitor?
There is no review.
And the second exhibit, which you entitled Impact of Adding 970 Invenergy Megawatts in FCA 11, can you explain this to us, and in particular how it differs from the previous exhibit?
Okay, so let me start down at the line that says price at just below FCA 11 without Invenergy, called price at this capacity, which says $6.64. Everything above that is identical to Exhibit 22.
Thank you. Continue, please.
But now we're adding 970 megawatts in, and that would give you a clearing price of $2.42. But here, because again, there is a what I view as a generalized industry understanding that below the $5.50 price, capacity will remove itself so that the price gets back to $5.50, more would delist, and you get back to the same place. And Mr. Parker suggested in his testimony, which we just recently received, that this would, if we put 970 megawatts back in, that we'd end up at 703, but because thered be more delisting, in fact, all we get to is 550.
And the third exhibit that you're providing, what does this show?
That's CLF 24 for the record, right?
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, CLF 24, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
The one he just testified relative to was 23.
Yeah, but before we go to 24, you prepared exhibits 22 and 23 yourself?
I did.
I'd move that those be admitted as full exhibits, Commissioner.
Any objection? Okay, they both may be admitted fully, 22 and 23,
And
CLF.
Referring now to 24, what do you seek to convey with this exhibit?
If you give me just a second, I want to look at some of the rebuttal testimony so that I can, if you just give me a second.
Yes, certainly. I'm happy to move on to...
Yeah, no, let me explain what it says, but I would have preferred to refer to the specific testimony.
Let me move on to some other
Okay.
items.
Yep.
Mr. Parker says on page 54, line 21, quote, Mr. Stix focused a large part of his testimony on Invenergy's initial $280 million estimate, unquote. Is Mr. Parker correct about that?
He is.
Why did you do that?
Because that figure was presented in a public hearing on March 31st as the savings that were to come from the Invenergy project.
Mr. Parker says on page 57, chart at lines 18 to 19, Mr. Parker is showing what he believes are ratepayer benefits from the extra procurement beyond net ICR in FCA 10. First, do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of Mr. Parker's figures?
I have no reason to doubt the figures.
Do you have anything to add to what Mr. Parker says?
They result from the new sloped demand curve. In the past, if it had been a vertical demand curve, the swing could have been much greater. But they only relate to 1 year, and we've got a project here that should last 40 years. Will generate carbon from both oil and gas over that time frame, and may have very different impacts in other years.
Mr. Parker, on page 60, line 6 says, quote, there are other projects, and he means other than Clean Energy Connect, in the ISO New England queue that are further along in their development, unquote. Do you agree with Mr. Parker?
I do.
Also on page 60, lines 11 to 12, Mr. Parker says that, quote, individual static delist bids became effective at different prices, unquote. Do you agree with Mr. Parker?
I do agree with him, but I'd like to present Exhibit 24 now.
Please do so.
So this shows the various FCA clearing prices and the amount of static delist bids in the last 5 auctions. First, it is what I think that what Mr. Parker hypothesized was very logical, but it's a very weak relationship and would have very little impact on it would have no impact on my analysis and very little impact regardless. So what it says is if we, for example, drop from 703 to 550 in the clearing price, we might have 30 more, approximately 30 more megawatts of static delist if you look at the relationship that's shown here, which would have a tiny impact or no impact on price.
I'd like to direct your attention to Mr. Parker's testimony on page 63, line 15. Mr. Parker is talking here about your discussion of Invenergy's claimed ratepayer benefits in the energy market as distinguished from the capacity market. He's referring to a discussion in your pre-filed testimony that begins on page 46, line 1, and runs through page 49, line 7. And importantly, it includes your chart at the bottom of page 46. Specifically, Mr. Parker says on page 63, line 15, quote, "First, Invenergy's estimate of $2.36 per megawatt hour is in the middle of the range presented by Mr. Stix," unquote. Do you have anything to say about that?
I do.
What is that?
I think that his text on lines 15 through 19 represents a misunderstanding of the analysis here. The claimed savings here, looking at the average is irrelevant. These are cumulative. Each of these plants estimated a certain amount of savings, and each one is separate, and cumulatively, they total $9.20, which is almost all of the margin one could expect from a natural gas plant, from the existing pool of natural gas plants.
Were you saying...
Net of variable costs, as I indicated in my testimony.
Were you saying in your testimony at pages 46 to 49 that the energy market savings claimed by Invenergy could not possibly be true?
No, I was not. It's possible that their claimed savings are true.
Is it possible that all the claimed savings from the 4 separate plants that you list in the chart on the bottom of page 46 are all true cumulatively?
It's remotely possible, but highly, highly unlikely.
In your pre-filed testimony, Mr. Stix, you did some fairly extensive and elaborate calculations. Is that correct?
Yes.
How long did the calculations take you after you knew the results of FCA 10?
My analysis of FCA 10 was done within a week of the publishing of the results of FCA 10, which happened on February 11th. They published a table on that date, which enabled you to do a fairly complete analysis at that point.
It was published on February 11th, and you took a week to do the calculations. So you were done certainly by February 18th or 20th.
That's correct.
Would a person looking at the published ISO figures of the results of FCA 10 have had reason to know what those results were and do the necessary calculations by Thursday, March 31st, 2016?
Of course.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Stix.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Stix, am I correct that you're currently employed by the Conservation Law Foundation?
I am a volunteer, as I indicated.
Okay. So you're working on a volunteer basis for the Conservation Law Foundation?
That's correct.
And I'm just looking at your CV that you provided. Is it correct? Am I correct in stating that in according with your CV, CLF is the only organization that you are providing services for right now in a consulting capacity?
I do other volunteer work. I don't know if one would characterize it as consulting.
Okay. Well, Conservation Law Foundation is the last item, the last entity that's listed in your CV.
Yeah.
And if you could turn to the document you just submitted.
Which one?
Yeah, let's pull out. Looking at. I'm looking at. Looks like it's CLF 2022. Now, there's a number under where it says capacity in FCA 11, and you referenced a new capacity number of 600 megawatts, correct? What project is that in reference to, that 600 megawatts?
You know, I don't think I need to specify a specific project. What I will note is two things. If you look at the last 5 forward capacity auctions, they averaged 700 megawatts of new generating capacity, 711 megawatts. And in FCA 10, there were 735 megawatts of capacity that bid in between 850 and 703, which did not clear.
Okay, so
So this is a reasonable estimate.
you're making an estimate?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
It's not a reference to any specific
No,
project?
it's not.
What if the numbers of that assumption turns out not to be correct, for example, and that number is in fact 0? Would you agree with me that the clearing prices in your analysis would go up?
They would go up at least to 703, and I can't calculate the specific number while we're here. I have to do an analysis.
And
From the 664 number, they would go up at least to 703.
at least to 703. Thank you. And comparing the two price points that you have in your exhibit, the first price point of $6.64, price at this capacity, and looking at the last price point, the clearing price.
Yeah.
See that? Based on these two price points there, would you agree that the addition of the Clear River project, the 485 megawatts of the Clear River project, would result in a lower capacity price?
That depends. It depends on who else is bidding in and at what price they are bidding in. And so it's conceivable that there'd be another project of similar size bidding in, or a collection of projects bidding in just above 550, in which case the benefit of Clear River could be close to 0. Or alternatively, if there is nothing bidding below Clear River, there would be benefits.
And when you say there would be benefits, is it fair to say that those benefits would result in capacity cost savings?
There would be capacity, somewhere between 0 and my estimate is about 28 million.
Thank you. Now, in your analysis that you said that you performed for FCA 10, did you calculate independently the capacity price savings in that 1 week period of time?
Yes.
You did. How did you do that?
There's a published demand curve, and there was. We know what the clearing price was. We know that it had to be that sufficient other capacity was bidding at 850 to clear the market. We know that it could have bid as low as 704. And so I used the demand curve and the capacity information supplied in a filing or in a published document from February 11th.
How about the energy price saving? Did you calculate the energy price saving?
I did not do that. Actually, I did that at, I can't speak to exactly when I did the energy price savings
Fair enough.
calculation. And that was not dependent on FCA 10.
How about the forecasting of the dispatch of the Clear River project? Did you forecast that in your model or your analysis?
I did not separately forecast the dispatch.
How about forecasting emissions reductions during that 1 week period of time? Did you do an analysis of that?
I was not asked my brief was to look at consumer savings.
Were you analyzing with regard to just New England?
Actually, I was estimating for Rhode Island.
Did you use any particular software program?
No. Other than Excel.
Other than in Excel?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I believe you made some corrections to your testimony where you made some references in your testimony to the term ICR in many reference points there.
Correct.
Now, I think I heard you correct that reference that what you intended to refer to, I believe, was the NICR.
That is correct.
And that's the net installed capacity
That's
requirement
correct.
that we've heard a lot about today already. I believe you just heard Mr. Fagan testify that according to the ISO, the NICR is the minimum amount that is required or needed for the ISO New England's procurement, reliability, need, purpose, or something like that. You recall that testimony?
I don't. If you can have it read back to me, I'd be happy to.
I'm not sure that something like that counts as a fair question.
All right. Let's look at it this way. Do you agree that the NICR is the minimum amount that the ISO New England is looking at when it's doing its forecasts for upcoming Part 4 capacity market auctions?
First of all, I'm not an expert in. I'm here to look at the consumer impacts in capacity and energy. I'm not an expert on that, but my understanding is it's a target.
It's a minimum target, correct?
I don't know that.
Well, would you look to your testimony up to page 8? I have it for you. Page 8, page 9. I want you to look to the bottom of page 8. Mr. Stix, at the bottom of page 8, you have a sentence that begins, the ICR is the largest amount of electricity that the ISO believes it could possibly require for system reliability at the time of the year when electricity load is greatest. You see that? Did you mean to say that the NICR, which is the correct reference point, is the minimum amount of electricity that is needed?
I did not.
You believe it's the largest amount?
I would say that I'm uncomfortable with the word largest, but I'm also uncomfortable with the word minimum.
In fact, the ISO New England procured about 500 megawatts in excess of the NICR in the forward capacity number 9 auctions. Is that a fair statement?
I don't have those figures in front of me.
Do you know if they procured more than the NICR in the forward capacity 9?
I don't have those figures in front of me.
How about in the forward capacity market number 10 that just occurred in February?
They did procure more than the NICR.
They procured about 1,400 megawatts.
Correct.
FCA, from what we've heard, correct?
That's correct.
So would you agree with me that the more capacity that cleared the FCA would mean that the prices will be lower for ratepayers?
First of all, it depends which auction we're talking about and where we are on the curve.
Well, the more the capacity that clears would translate into lower capacity prices, correct?
In FCA 11, not at every point in the curve. Excuse me, in FCA 11, not at every point in the curve because of the transitional curves. In FCA 10, until you hit the limits at the top or the bottom of the curve, that's true.
Now, why would ISO New England purchase or acquire more than the NICR, which they did in FCA 10, as you just testified? In your view, in your opinion, why would they do that?
Now, again, I'm going beyond my field of expertise here. What I was chartered with was estimating the consumer savings.
Well, wouldn't it be true that the acquiring of more than the NICR would mean that the ISO New England is trying to maximize the value and the social value to ratepayers as part of its auction process?
Again, you're going beyond my expertise here.
But we do know for a fact that the ISO cleared the Invenergy project for 485 megawatts.
We do.
Okay. Would you? I'd like to just turn you just briefly to the chart you just were referencing, with Mr. Elmer.
Which one?
That was on page 46, I believe, of your testimony. See that?
I'm getting there. Go ahead.
So, am I correct that what you were doing to derive this $9.20 figure here was to add all of the price references that are referenced above there to total?
That's correct.
To accumulate to $9.20?
That's correct.
Now, what assumptions did you make about what these price points represented?
I simply, in the case of Invenergy, I took the material that you provided after the first data requests back in January, where you provided the energy price savings by month, and this is for the calendar year 2020, and the gigawatt hours, and I divided the two.
Okay, well, would you
For
agree?
example.
And divide what by 2?
No, you divide it by the number of electricity hours. So you take the savings, divide by the hours, and you get dollars per megawatt hour. That was a table that was provided in response to, and I'm not sure I have it here, but in response to a CLF data request, a non-confidential data request.
Okay. Now, these are energy price savings reductions, correct? Now, the energy price, for example, in the Tewantic-Oxford column, that's a price point that is in Connecticut, correct?
Correct.
And the price point that's in for the Invenergy project, $2.36, that's a price point in Rhode Island, correct?
That's correct.
Well, would I be correct in saying that the energy prices that are determined here are factored in based on where they're located? That is the node on where the energy is withdrawn from the system.
I'm not certain of that, but I'm not certain of that.
Do you think that's a fair characterization of how energy
It's
prices?
probably correct, but I'm not certain.
Right. Well, if that's probably correct, that energy prices are set based on the node or the location of where the energy is produced or purchased, would you agree with me that it's not fair to take a price point in, say, Connecticut and apply it to a project in another state?
That's a reasonable hypothesis. However, when you go look at the data, and I don't have it all with me, but when you go look at the data on the ISO New England website about the LMPs, they vary. For the vast majority of the time, the differences between locations is tiny.
Okay, so it's
So
true.
it's not, which suggests that energy, the price differences reflect minor transmission costs and line losses rather than significant differences between locations.
Well, it's true, is it not that there are literally thousands of different price points in the New England ISO system?
I don't think it's thousands. There are many price points. I don't know the exact number.
Fair enough. There are many separate price points, correct?
There are.
And would you agree that these price points are determined at each of the different energy injection and energy withdrawal points on the system?
They are. The differences mostly, not, and this would not be true in Maine and in a totally constrained area, but they mostly reflect transmission costs and line losses, and are, under most circumstances, they're quite small.
So would you agree that it's not a certainty, it's not a given that if the price point at one location goes up, that automatically means it will go up in a different location, a different state? It's not an automatic relationship, is it?
It's not an automatic relationship.
So, and would you agree, because of this nodal system, this nodal price point system that I'm talking about, one would generally expect that the impact of generation on nodal prices, energy prices, to be greatest at the nodes located closest to that generation resource?
I can't state that.
Well, would you agree that if you would add the addition of a new efficient natural gas combined cycle generation project, that would have a depressive effect on the nodal prices closest to that facility?
I can't even state that for the following reason. If you look at where Invenergy's plant is going to go, it sits next to a number of other plants, and in fact, often those plants are trading at a discount. The prices at the LMPs closest to Burrillville are below the prices nearby.
Okay, let's turn to another topic. Would you take a look at your testimony on page 20? Looking at page 20, lines 9 to 11. Page 20, let's look at lines 8, I'm sorry. Here you're talking about giving some detail, I think, in regards to the FCA 10, the presence of Invenergy in the FCA 10. Now, Am I correct that when you prepared your testimony here, you did have Mr. Hardy's rebuttal testimony? I'm sorry, you had Mr. Hardy's pre-filed testimony that he filed in April at the time that you prepared your analysis.
Correct.
And you would agree that Mr. Hardy provided some recalculations based upon the results, the actual results of FCA 10, correct?
Yeah, I acknowledge that in my testimony.
Thank you. So, on line 8, where you talk about, here you make a statement that on the other hand, if those 735 megawatts were actually bid into round 4 at just under $8.50 kilowatts per month, at say $8.48 kilowatts per month, then the savings to be realized by Rhode Island ratepayers in CCP 10 due to the presence of Invenergy would be at or very close to my $36 million figure. You see that?
I do see it.
Now, am I correct that when you're saying the CCP 10, you're referring to the period of the delivery year period of June of 2019 to May of 2020?
That's correct.
So in other words, when you say that the savings in this statement here would be at or very close to my 36 million figure, that's for that period of June 2019 to May 2020, correct?
What I said in the full paragraph was between 0 and 36 million.
Well, just reading your sentence.
Yeah, but in the previous paragraph, it says it could be as low as 0.
Would you agree that this sentence says would be at or very close to my 36 million?
That's what it says, but it should be read in its whole, including the previous paragraph.
And would you agree with me that in Mr. Hardy's recalculations, he calculated that the projected savings for that same period of time, the CCP 10, would amount to $39 million. Do you remember that figure?
I don't have it in front of me, but I think I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was 39 million.
I can show you the testimony.
Yeah, no,
Would you accept that was the record?
it was a little over 39, if I recollect correctly. What I can't remember is was that confidential, because they made most of their financial calculations confidential.
All right, I'll represent that 39 million was not a confidential number. Would you agree with me that Mr. Hardy's 39 million in your statement here of a savings at or very close to 36 million is a relatively close assumption? Agree?
What I said is 0 to 36 million. So 0 is not close, 36 is close.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break at this point?
We're only going to witness.
Whatever doesn't hold.
I'm having a great
I think
time.
you love this stuff.